Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the New Zealand Franchising Podcast. I'm Callum Floyd. In the last episode, we looked at what franchising actually is, including the basic roles performed by the franchisor and franchisee and how they're bound together. Today, I want to turn to a question that sits behind all of that. Why do businesses franchise? After all, if a business is successful, why not simply open more company-owned locations, employ more managers, and keep all of the ownership and profit? And that is such a good question. The answer is that businesses franchise for many different reasons. There is no single explanation. As a bit of background, this is a question I've both researched and worked with for more than 30 years. Big picture, for some businesses, contemplating franchising is initially a response to an opportunity. As an example, customers or employees might see potential and inquire about opening a unit as a franchise, and the business wants a structure that can help it expand. For others, franchising can be more strongly shaped by limitations in their existing structure. There may be limited capital for future growth, limited management depth, difficulty retaining capable operators, or the common challenge associated with supervising a geographically dispersed network. That is why I think it's more useful to see franchising not simply as a growth technique, but as a choice about organisational structure. Who invests, who owns, who manages, who carries the risk, and how value is created and shared across the system. Sometimes it's less about growth and more about optimisation and long-term sustainability of a network. Businesses arrive at franchising from very different starting points. And at one end of the spectrum can be a founder operating a single successful business who is considering how that concept might be replicated and grown. At the other, maybe a substantial company-owned chain with dozens or even 100 or more operating units, considering whether some or all of those locations should be owned and operated differently. Other businesses may already have an established network, but one built through licensing, dealerships or agencies or distributorships, contractors or some other form of commercial relationship. There can also be organisations with a hybrid of different models, basically investigating a better way of structuring the operations, and that can also involve joint venture and cooperative networks. Over the course of my consulting work, I've worked with businesses across all of these starting points, and that experience has reinforced for me that the pathway into franchising is rarely identical from one organisation to another. With that in mind, some are pulled towards it by opportunity franchising could provide conceptually. They may have customers asking when the business will open in another city, or customers directly inquiring about opening a local operation as a franchise. Employees, suppliers, property owners, or investors may also inquire as they see an opportunity or a gap. And sometimes the brand is already travelling further than the business can comfortably support. Other businesses are pushed towards franchising by the limitations of their current structure. They may not have the capital to fund every new location. They may be able to find employees, but not enough strong managers prepared to take full responsibility for local performance. And the founder may be reaching the limitation of what can be managed directly, or the business may have learnt that conventional employment, agency or dealer arrangements, or contractors do not create the commitment or consistency in delivery it really needs at the local level. This question has interested me for a long time, and in my work, the same broad motivations often appear, although their relative importance can vary greatly from one business to another. And for simplicity here, I group them into 6 interconnected drivers. The 6 drivers we'll work through are not a checklist. They're more nuanced than that. They overlap. They often reinforce one another, but ultimately different businesses ascribe different levels of importance to each, and some can't be known until a comprehensive study has been undertaken. First and most commonly cited reason, but often not the most important reason, relates to access to capital. Under a company-owned model, the company generally funds each new site, the fit-out, vehicles, equipment, and working capital requirements. Under a franchise model, by contrast, the franchisee typically invests in establishing and operating the local business. That can enable expansion without the franchisor needing to fund every operating unit itself. But none of that is to suggest that the franchisor itself doesn't need to invest. The franchisor still requires substantial capital It must research and develop the total business and franchise model, including the support infrastructure and leadership needed to sustain the network. Franchising changes where capital is deployed. It does not remove the need for investment. In addition, we need to remember that many franchisors also simultaneously own and operate company-owned outlets, and that concept in itself will be the subject of a future podcast. But separately here, in relation to capital, there may also be benefits beyond the initial funding of growth. Local franchisees can sometimes make more disciplined asset decisions than a large corporate franchisor can because they are more motivated by their own investment. It is their own capital at risk. Franchisees may therefore seek better utilisation of vehicles, premises, equipment or labour. And of course, at the same time, the franchisor obviously needs standards that prevent a franchisee's short-term savings or optimisation from damaging quality, safety or the brand. But this point can be extremely important for some companies. The second driver is the motivational effect of ownership. And for many businesses, this is the most important driver. A franchisee has usually invested personal capital, accepted business risk, and tied a meaningful part of their future to the performance of the local business. There is therefore a direct link between effort, decision-making, efficiency to their profit and return on investment. And that's not to suggest employees or employee managers are not committed, and it doesn't mean that every owner will perform well, but ownership can create a different level of accountability and persistence. An owner can be more likely to pick up the phone to a customer, build relationships in the community, or respond to an issue outside of normal business office hours, because the consequences of that flow directly into their own business today and by extension to that business's future value. Franchising can also create an ownership pathway for talented employees or managers who might otherwise leave to pursue their own ambitions. In the right circumstances, it can retain capability within the wider system while giving that person a genuine stake in the outcome. And that in itself was the principal initial reason why one prominent New Zealand national company franchised and now operates internationally. The third driver is management capacity. Growing and managing a company-owned network is difficult. Every additional company-owned operation requires management attention. As a network expands, the organisation needs more management, regional managers, performance systems, and corporate overhead. Franchising, by contrast, and depending on how its architecture is configured, can distribute a significant part of that local management responsibility to franchisees. And commonly, a capable franchisee does not simply carry out operational tasks. They also conduct local marketing, recruit and lead people, manage customers, make local decisions, solve problems, and take responsibility for the performance of their business. That can allow a central organisation to oversee a much larger network than it could manage directly. But again, however, responsibility is not eliminated. It changes form. Instead of directly managing every employee and location, the franchisor needs to become highly skilled at selecting, training, supporting, influencing, and holding independent business owners accountable. That can make for a more scalable structure, but is not necessarily a simpler one. At this point, it's worth pausing because the first three drivers are often closely connected. The same franchisee may provide capital, local management capability, and owner motivation, and that combination can be incredibly powerful. But it also means the franchisor is selecting a long-term business partner who needs to be capable and the right fit, not simply someone looking to fund and operate another outlet. Fourth driver is local ownership and continuity. Many businesses depend on an understanding of local customers, local labour markets, competitors, community relationships, and the practical realities of operating in a particular area. A locally invested owner can bring knowledge that is difficult to reproduce from a distant head office. They may know which relationships matter, how customers make decisions, where demand is developing, and how to adapt to local activity without losing the core brand proposition. Continuity matters as well, and corporate managers may be transferred or moved on. Meanwhile, a franchisee may be more likely to remain in the market for many years, building relationships and reputation over time, and sometimes passing ownership to another family member. That does not mean every decision should be local, and one of the central design challenges in franchising is deciding what must be consistent across the network and where local judgment should be encouraged. And again, that will be the subject of a future podcast. Fifth driver is the important value that can be realised from building scale. And while every situation is different, as a network grows, the franchisor may be able to spread central costs across more operating businesses. Investments in training, technology, product development, specialist capability, and support can become more viable. A larger network may also gain purchasing power, stronger brand reputation, broader marketing reach, and better access to suppliers, data, and expertise. Scale can create value for franchisees as well as the franchisor. A single local franchise business within a well-organised franchise system may therefore gain access to resources and capability that will be difficult to build independently. But scale does not create value automatically. A company's circumstance, management, and franchise structure is crucial for harnessing economies of scale across each of these areas. So overall, the purpose is not simply to accumulate outlets, it's to build a network whose combined capability is much greater than the sum of its individual businesses. The sixth driver concerns risk and return. In a franchise system, the franchisee generally assumes much of the local investment and operating risk. In return, the franchisee receives the opportunity to build income, equity, and capital value in their own business. The franchisor has a different risk and return profile. It may have less capital invested in each local operation, but it carries responsibility for the quality, development, and stewardship of the overall franchise system. Its brand, reputation, future income, and associated value depend heavily on how franchisees perform. A failure in one part of the network can affect customers and businesses elsewhere. This is why franchising is so interdependent. Risk may be allocated between the parties, but it is never completely separated. A franchisor cannot build a strong long-term system if franchisees are consistently unprofitable. Equally, franchisees cannot prosper for long if the franchisor fails to maintain the brand, systems, and the competitive position of the network. The stronger structures create a reasonable relationship between the risks each party carries, the responsibilities each party accepts, and the returns each party can earn. So when we ask why a business franchises, the answer is rarely one thing. It may be seeking capital, but also management capability. It may value owner motivation, but also local knowledge. It may want scale while also seeking a different allocation of risk and return. The mix will vary by business, sector, stage of development, and strategic objective. And that is why the decision should begin with the business and its circumstances. Having explored the advantages, it's important to be equally clear about the other side of the equation. Franchising is not automatically the right answer for a successful business. A franchise network is more complex in some respects than a company-owned chain. Franchisees are independent business owners. They have their own capital at risk, their own ambitions, their own perspectives, and at times, their own disagreements with the franchisor. The franchisor cannot rely on hierarchy and authority. It must lead through a combination of clear agreement, well-designed systems, sound economics, communication, influence, support, performance management, and trust. Franchising can also magnify weakness. If the underlying business model is unprofitable, poorly differentiated, overly dependent on the founder, or difficult to teach, replicating it will not cure those problems. It may simply spread them faster and involve other people's livelihood and capital. On the other hand, a business may be fundamentally strong, but constrained by an ownership or management structure that no longer suits its objectives. And in that case, franchising may provide a powerful alternative. The key question is therefore not simply, can this business be franchised? It is, should this business be franchised? for what reasons, and through what kind of structure. Once a business has a clear reason for considering franchising, it needs to translate that reason into a workable franchise model. And that involves a much broader set of interconnected decisions involving areas like the roles of franchisor and franchisee, territories, fees, investment, support, and many other areas. I think of that wider process as franchise architecture. We will explore it in a later episode because a franchise system is not simply a legal agreement and a manual. It is an integrated organisational and commercial structure. And the central lesson is the same. Structural choices create consequences elsewhere in the system. Let's finish with 5 key takeaways. First, businesses franchise for different reasons. There is no single explanation that applies equally to every business. Second, businesses may be initially pulled towards franchising by opportunity or pushed towards it by limitations in their current structure. Third, the major motivations are interconnected: capital, management capacity, motivation, local knowledge, scale, network value, and risk, return, and independence. Fourth, franchising does not remove the need for capital, management, or responsibility. It reallocates them between the franchisor, franchisee, and the wider system. And finally, franchising is not automatically the right strategy. It must be grounded in a strong underlying business and developed through a thoughtfully designed franchise architecture that can create sustainable value for both parties. In the next episode, we'll look at the other side of the relationship and ask, why do people buy franchises? What are they really investing in? What attracts them to an established brand and system rather than starting independently? And what reservations do they have when approaching that decision? Thank you for joining me for episode 3 of the New Zealand Franchising Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed today's discussion. If you have, please consider following the podcast and sharing it with others who have an interest in franchising. Until next time, I'm Callum Floyd. Thanks for listening.